Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Nick.
And we're here to talk about The Fugitive, starring Harrison Ford, Tommy Lee Jones, Joe Pantoliano, Andreas Katouris, Jerome Krabbe, Daniel Roebuck, Tom Wood, Julianne Moore, Ron Dean, Joseph Casala, Jane Lynch, and Cilla Ward. Directed by Andrew Davis, based on the 1960s television series, released in 1993 on a $44 million budget, grossed $368 million at the box office, was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, with Jones winning Best Supporting Actor. So that's a big one, Nick. And what I want to know is what your background with this movie is, and did you ever watch the show on reruns? Because I know you weren't around to watch it live.
No, I never saw the show on reruns. I knew it existed, but I've never seen it, even though I think there was a reboot of the TV series, I want to say like 5-6 years ago. I could be wrong, but I thought I remember that. But as far as the movie goes, I've only seen it really once before, and it was way back when this came out on VHS. I remember we bought it on VHS because that was when, basically the time. I remember when Batman came out and like VHSs were all suddenly now cheaper to buy, and this was one of the first ones that we bought. And it was something where I remember watching it with my parents like one Saturday night, and I remember the stuff about the one-armed man and Tommy Lee Jones and outhouse doghouses and him jumping off the sewage whatever that was there. But that's basically it. I just remember, I liked it from what I remembered. So I thought it'd be kind of a fun revisit, because they really don't seem to make movies like this much anymore. These kind of suspense thrillers like we had in the 90s. So I thought it'd be kind of a nice throwback.
Yeah, they don't make these adult dramas like this anymore. This is usually a television series, like you say. And I mean, that's even the origin story of this. I remember watching reruns of that with my dad when I was a kid, but I didn't pay much attention to it until the advertisements for this movie started coming out. And he was like, oh, you really ought to see the old ones. And I think I saw enough of them to kind of follow the basic story. I ended up seeing the finale. I know how it ends. And I remember going to see this movie with my family in the theaters. And I was a teenager at this point, so that was a rare thing that we would still do that together. But I know I saw it with both of my folks in the theaters. I think my brother may have even gone too. And I just remember liking it too. I've never owned it on any media, but I've seen it on television, through the years, 100 times. And I think it's hard to not remember some of the big lines from Tommy Lee Jones and, his agent Gerard and what he does, and him and Harrison Ford together. But Nick, I'll be honest with you, it had been, probably 10 years since I had watched it last, like actually sat to try and watch it. I maybe caught pieces or a bit here on television, but hadn't watched it in full in a while. And you're right, I've forgotten a lot about this movie. I remember the broad strokes, but how it all worked out and what the conspiracy was and the big plot. I just remember Harrison Ford with like the worst, homeless man beard ever. And like these weird shots of poor Cilla Ward, who just got thrown around a room in black and white. That's all I remembered about this. And then of course, Tommy Lee Jones.
Yep, a little bit more than I remembered, but we're kind of on the same page there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've seen U.S. Marshals, the pseudo sequel to this that came out 4 or 5 years after this, probably more recently than I've seen this, or I know more recently than I've seen this, because I went back and tried to rewatch that a few years ago thinking, okay, you know what, this might be a kind of a fun one to do. Let me see if it's worth doing. And I remember having the same problem with it again. It just kind of falls apart in the second and third act, and it doesn't really hold together, but it's interesting for a setup. But that's U.S. Marshals. That's another story for another day. But yeah, this movie, a lot of fun. And you and I had this conversation going back to last fall. We went and saw Ford versus Ferrari in the theaters, and we talked about how they don't make big budget adult dramas anymore. I mean, this was made for $44 million in 1993. That's like 80 or 90 million now. And they just don't put that kind of money behind these things. And so before we get into this movie specifically, why is that, you think?
I don't know. I mean, I would have to look at the box office throughout the years and see if they were kind of a diminishing return, as they went on. But I think it's just they end up putting the money into either, the big superhero style action films, and then those help finance the smaller ones. But these kind of medium, style movies seem to have kind of fallen to the wayside. And I think you kind of hit it that a lot of these scripts and everything like this are kind of being more brought to TV, as far as, well, we can just make it into a 8-part series or something like that. I mean, even like God, it was that like Watchmen on HBO, which was adult drama. Yes, superheroes, but it was like, oh, we're just going to turn that into a 8-part series on TV. And you see it even too, like even some of these other stuff, like the one with like Bates Motel, you know what I mean? Where it's like kind of more of these adult drama stuff where it might, just seems to be more appropriate for TV nowadays. Cause I think the writers feel like maybe they could probably stretch out the plot and get a little bit deeper with characters by doing that.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we're going to get into it. There's a lot that they cram into this one. And I mean, again, the origins of this was a 4-season television series. There was a lot in those too. And I mean, it was a plot that just, you never seemed he was ever going to get a break. I liken the old Fugitive to the experience of watching something like 24 in the early 2000s that ran through, 2008 or 2009, however long that lasted. It sort of that serialized, like it's always one more thing for our protagonist. Is he ever going to finally get to, the big payoff with the one-armed man and all that stuff? And yeah, I mean, you finally did. Spoiler alert for a TV show that's been off the air for 60 years now. So, but yeah, I mean, but it's fun. You can go look it up on YouTube. I think it's even out like on Prime or something. You can go watch the old shows, or if you get TV Land or any of that kind of stuff, you can watch it that way. But yeah, it's been a while since I've seen this one, but it was fun to go back and revisit because Harrison Ford in his middle age, I mean, honestly, his career started when he was 33. So that we always think about him as being older. That's because he was, and he is, and now you see him in this prime of the late 80s through the mid 90s. I mean, he had a heck of a run, man, right up until that second Jack Ryan movie. And then everything kind of, I don't know, it went down a little bit. And then he's been here and there. And then of course, Star Wars, he, came back and did those things. But yeah, there was a time there in where Harrison Ford was a go-to action lead, which is not what you think of when you think of him.
Yeah, he's still, though, he's always got that grumpiness to him, and he plays it pretty well in this movie where, I think really the only thing that, I remember him in that, that he really wasn't playing the grumpy guy was probably Indiana Jones. I mean, even Han Solo to some regard was kind of the, especially later, he got a little bit more grumpy, but that seems to be kind of his calling, especially now with like his later movies, is like, just kind of being this no nonsense kind of pissed off guy. Some of these other movies I've seen him too, like Mosquito Coast. I don't know if you ever seen that, or some of the other. What was that one that he did with Michelle? Was it Michelle Pfeiffer? What Lies Beneath?
Yeah, What Lies Beneath. Yeah,
stuff like that, where he kind of always plays. Seems like kind of the intellect, but kind of the gruff intellect in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think of movies like, ones where he even missed a little bit, like Regarding Henry, which is not really a great film, but he plays this really smart guy who goes through a traumatic injury and has to get over it. Presumed Innocent is kind of a personal favorite of mine. It's not a great movie, but it's a good kind of B legal thriller. Same sort of time period as this. If you haven't seen it, the book's really great that it's based on, and they're pretty faithful to it in the film too. And it's a Scott Turow story. So he's got a niche and he works. And then you've got Tommy Lee Jones, who at this point, I think I knew him best as being Doolittle Lynn from Coal Miner's Daughter, and then a bunch of like really small little roles where he always played somebody interesting or doing something. But this was his major breakout to make him a bankable star. And I mean, up and through today, I mean, he's still a big bankable star, but this made him somebody you could trust to lead an action franchise. I mean, no doubt 10, 15 years later, he got Men in Black, and you can see a lot of Gerard in Agent K.
Oh yeah, totally. Even No Country for Old Men. I mean, he's basically playing the different versions or different volumes of the same character. Let's talk about Harrison Ford being kind of the smart, grumpy guy. Tommy Lee Jones he's always playing the deathly, overly serious, where it's almost kind of funny guy.
Yeah, or he's super cocky and just doesn't care what anybody thinks, which is a lot of Gerard. Like I remember Space Cowboys, which is by no means a great film, but it's funny to watch him and Clint Eastwood and Donald Sutherland and all these old men. I think what the original Maverick, what's his name, James Garner, running around like they're going to be astronauts again or something. I mean, there's some fun to be had in Tommy Lee Jones, and he certainly has a presence and a charisma on screen. But in 1993. what's amazing about this is, there's a lot of money behind this movie, and it was a big franchise. We're going to take this beloved series, and now we're going to update it 25 years later. So anybody that's fussing about the way Hollywood recycles stuff now, they've been doing it forever, folks. All right, this is nothing new. And this was a big deal, but it wasn't the kind of movie that you thought like, oh yeah, we know we're making this big movie. Nobody involved with this, they thought that, okay, we're just doing a job, and then we'll just go do another one. And like, it was no big deal to them. There was no hype for this at all. And then it came out, and again, the box office was massive for this thing. 300 million for a movie like this is unbelievable.
Yep. Well, it's even after that, even got the nice little Simpson parodies. I remember even like really two moments in The Simpsons where Homer was arrested, and then they're trying to get him in through a drive-through, and the cop car is trying to go through a drive-through real quick, but it's too tall, so they're leaning it over, and it ends up falling over, and he ends up getting out, and the old man pushes it. So it's like the train scene where he's like, all handcuffed, kind of doing that. And there's even one where Milhouse jumps out of the sewer thing, just like Harrison Ford did in here. So I think once you make The Simpsons like that, especially in the 90s, you know your movie is part of pop culture.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, people have parodied the "I Don't Care" line and stuff for years, and we can get more into that as we go. But I guess it's time to give a quick plot summary, because I mean, again, this movie is a little bit older. I mean, at this point, it's 27 years old, so there's a good chance some of our audience has never experienced it. Renowned Chicago surgeon Dr. Richard Kimball, played by Harrison Ford, is convicted of the brutal murder of his wife, all the while claiming it was a one-armed man who did it and that he was framed. And after the bus carrying Kimball and others to prison crashes, he escapes and goes to extreme lengths to prove his innocence. On his trail is Deputy U.S. Marshal Sam Gerard, played by Tommy Lee Jones, along with his team of agents. And through his research, Kimball not only finds the one-armed man, a dirty former police officer named Sykes, who specializes in security for a powerful pharmaceutical firm now, but he also learns that his friend, Dr. Charles Nichols, was the one who orchestrated the murder of his wife, as well as the death of a pharmaceutical executive. As Kimball makes these discoveries, he leaves clues for Gerard and his team to find, so that they can begin to realize he was indeed innocent all along. Nichols falsified lab samples from Kimball and others in order to fast-track an experimental drug to the market, which makes Nichols even more richer. So Kimball gets into a fight with Sykes and subdues him on a subway, and then Kimball confronts Nichols at a medical conference while Gerard, the agents, and the whole Chicago PD swarm the place. Kimball and Nichols fight all over the hotel. They fight through a skylight. They eventually, make it to the laundry facility, and Nichols is about to shoot Gerard, but Kimball gets the drop on him and knocks him out, and then surrenders himself to Gerard, who subsequently gives him an escorted ride away and uncuffs him as credits roll. And that's the quick plot summary. And the thing I want to talk about right from the jump here, Nick, is how much they cram in the first 10 minutes of this movie. We intro Kimball, Nichols, others, the wife's murder is cut in between all of it, his arrest, the one-armed man, the cops investigating his trial and conviction. That all happens before the credits are done.
Very Shawshank Redemption is what I felt like. Is like you got the whole, set up completely done right away with the murder, kind of what he was doing during the time, and then fast track the trial, which was nice. I think, trial movies, especially I think towards the late 90s, early 2000s were all the rage. And I'm just kind of glad that we didn't get a whole 15, 20-minute trial scene where it's just like, let's just get him on the death sentence here. So that way we can just get on with the plot. Cause I could totally have seen that where, they try to drop some of these nuggets of who could have done this during the trial. But, I'm glad that they didn't go that way, and we got right to kind of the, the meat and potatoes of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's a script that, a lot of different people worked on, and the way it's structured and the way the director puts this thing together with the editor is smart, because in the TV show, this kind of all unfolded throughout the history of the show. When you start that show, Kimball's been on the run for 6 months. And so you're kind of catching up on the back end of it. It gets told in flashbacks and stuff. And we get that a little bit here, but it's a way to sort of short leash the audience into, okay, here's what you need to know. And this movie is not called The Doctor Prisoner. It's called The Fugitive. So we need to get him on the run as soon as possible. And it's really smart, economical filmmaking. And what I'm impressed with is how much information they cram into that 10 minutes, and it doesn't feel overwhelming. Like, the thing about Harrison Ford in this movie that I really just enjoyed this time was how subtle he portrays all of this. Because this is happening, and there's times when he's kind of shaking and losing it, but at no point do you feel like he is out of control. And that's a real neat, subtle performance.
Totally. And I think they portray it that way because he is a doctor. He is some guy that, probably sees, pretty terrible things day in and day out, but, and hits them, emotionally and everything like that. But he's got to stay in control because other people's lives depend on him being in control. And this time it's his life that he's got to save, by staying in control. And I like the whole, even when they got the two cops who are kind of dirt bags throughout the movie are interrogating him. And, he's starting to figure out, like, towards the end of the interrogation, like, you guys are thinking I'm doing this. And his whole, like, panic and everything like that, I thought was really well portrayed, especially when you kind of see it in his eyes as soon as he realizes this, like, you're talking about life insurance, and it just all of a sudden he's just like, you're thinking I'm killing her. I thought it was, I'm usually one that kind of says Harrison Ford's not a very good actor, but I think, especially in the beginning of this movie, I thought he did a very, very good job trying to, portray a guy who's broken, shocked, and then trying to figure out kind of what these cops are doing to him at the same time.
Yeah, the thing it reminded me of was a more modern performance, but I realize now Ben Affleck, maybe even unknowingly, was taking cues from this in his role in Gone Girl when he's being interrogated by the cops. And they're just asking him simple questions. And you call the cops dirtbags, it's just because they kind of come off that way. They're just doing their jobs. Like they're following what is in front of them. And what I find is neat, though, is they're not trying to trick him. They just ask him, like, well, okay, so what did the one-armed man look like? How tall was he, doctor? These kind of details? And they realize, like, they're breaking him down because not uncommon if you listen to a lot of true crime podcasts like we do. The cops get a scent on somebody and they don't let that stuff go, man. They will run with that forever. And I liked the way that played back and forth.
Well, I call them dirtbags because later in the movie when they're talking to Tommy Lee Jones's character and they bring up the whole motivation of, well, she's rich and she's got a lot of money. And Tommy Lee Jones says what everybody else is saying. It's like, he's a freaking doctor. He's already rich. And then they go, well, she's richer. And it's like, okay, you guys are, that's what the motivation you guys are looking for is the fact that she was richer. That's what I mean, though. It's like you guys got set on this whole, like, basically motive here that really doesn't hold water when you think about it. But yeah, it's just, even towards the end too, when they're, being questioned by, like, some of the press and stuff like that, even some of, like, their answers and everything, where they're like, what about the one-armed man? And it goes, Richard Kimball's still the one that killed him. It's like, guys are still being jerks in the end, even when everybody knows that the real killer has been caught here. But that's just my opinion.
Well, no, you're right. And that is how they play it. And we got to remember too, this is the early 90s. This is before DNA testing was a thing that local police departments could do it all, right? Even in a city like Chicago. So, like, nowadays, like, you look at this crime scene and you're like, well, like, Kimball's going to be exonerated inside of like an hour because they'll realize real quick there's no way he did this. Like, it doesn't match up at all, right? But there's very little physical evidence. I mean, yes, she scratches him because he's trying to carry her. That's totally reasonable, yes. And by the way, he also had, like, these unbelievable alibis, so it doesn't make any sense. Like, they could figure this out. Also, the fact that, ultimately we find out Nichols is the one that makes the call from his car phone that kind of sets up the whole kill with the one-armed man and all this. Like, they would have figured that out real quick. Like, fingerprinting, like, I know we had fingerprinting back then, but they didn't even bother with it. Like, this case wouldn't work today, but you have to look at it through the lens of 1992. Basically, when this was made. And yeah, I could totally see these guys making this case because, the one thing about homicide cops, at least in movies, and I'm only talking about the movie ones, their job is to do what? Make an arrest and get a conviction, or give enough evidence to the DA to make a conviction. And they figure that out. I mean, we see 6 months of life happen in 10 minutes here. But they do enough to convince not only that he did it, but, like, man, the judge goes off on him. I mean, it's like hanging judge style when he sentences him to death. It's crazy.
Yeah, they should have just had Herman Munster from My Cousin Vinny in there with the way he was acting.
Yeah, that would have been great, right? But I mean, they want to get to it is the point. And that's what I'm impressed with, is how much we jam into those first 10 minutes. And then, man, this movie takes off like a shot. This whole bus transfer crash, and you got the jump to conclusions Matt guy from Office Space as the guard. And when the crash goes down, like, Kimball saves a lot of people before he finally jumps off of the thing and that train hits. And I know that's a kind of a dated CGI look now, but I think the whole action set piece here looks really good. I mean, that's a one-take deal. They didn't get to do it twice.
Yeah, no, it's definitely is. I enjoy the use of practical effects and everything like that, and it's a well shot scene. I mean, Richard Kimball's damn lucky that this happened during his convoy back to the prison and everything like that. But you know what? You got to give the movie its setup. He's got to get out somehow. And what's the other way? That he's the one that breaks out and kills the guys? Then you're not going to be on his side. So it's like you got to have the scumbag prisoners kill the jerk, security guys. That way everybody kind of still feels good about it. And then he gets away.
Right. And you even have the one prisoner that really starts the whole thing going sideways because he starts choking and acting like he's going to, seize up, and then he does it to stab a guard because he's going down, might as well take some with him. And I was watching this going like, oh, so this is how they do the setup for Con Air too. It's almost the same way, just no John Malkovich and, Leonard Skinner music.
Oh yeah, and it's been, that's been done and done probably even before this and even done after. My God, they did it on Game of Thrones too, when Jaime Lannister got out of his cell. You know what I mean? It's like, bring the guys down because someone's getting injured or someone's dying, and then get the guy with his back turned. So it's something that, it's kind of cliched and stuff like that, but again, it works because it gets the plot going, and it's like they want to be able to set up. They want something to sell the movie too. I remember even seeing trailers for this, and the whole thing with him being handcuffed, running away from the train coming directly at him. That was kind of one of like the end points of the trailer, where it's like you got to see how this ends. So it's definitely well done, and it's I think it makes sense as far as the plot goes for the movie.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's a lot of fun. And I love the little subtle bit here where the guard throws the keys at Kendall to uncuff himself and to help himself. And he's like, you got to help me, get this guard out. And the other guard's like, screw you. But in the midst of it, Harrison Ford kind of swings around and acts like he drops the keys, but he really throws them to his fellow prisoner. Copeland is the guy's name. We only see him in one more scene. And I love that, though, that it's like they kind of exchange a look, and he's like, you better grab those before he notices. And I'm like, man, Kimball's also not above giving people another chance if he sees the opportunity there. And maybe it was because he knew the guy would die on the train otherwise, but they do meet up later on in kind of odd ways and go their other ways. So all of that goes down, though. Again, we're 15, 20 minutes into this movie, and we've had our big action set piece. We've had our setup, and we enter in the guy that, look, the Academy agreed, and I agree too, totally steals this movie. Tommy Lee Jones, not only with his dialogue, which I understand a lot of it was him improvising and things like that, but the way he commands his team, but doesn't like overlord around them. They all work together in unison. It's really impressive, the character actors they surround him with. And you totally buy that these people are U.S. Marshals when they arrive on the scene and take over.
Yeah, maybe minus the guy with the ponytail, but it's totally early 90s guy. You know what I mean? He probably has, you visit his home. He's probably got black silk bed sheets and everything too. Kind of like,
but they make fun of that though. Like later they call it out. Like, don't let anybody give you crap about that.
He reminds me of the next door neighbor in Christmas Vacation. So.
Yeah. Yes. Todd and Margot. Yes. Yep. Totally. Yeah. But Noah's a fun character because he's the kid of the group, and then you've got all the other more seasoned agents, and we see them get to do other stuff. But what I like here is how they don't do anything to set this up. Gerard walks on the scene, flashes that badge, starts talking, and immediately takes over everything and just commands the whole bit. And I love the way he takes over. Tommy Lee Jones has a presence when he's commanding a crowd of people. It's something directors have figured out, just put him around people and let him do this stuff. And he's really good at it. And how many times have you seen the I want every doghouse, outhouse line ripped off by something?
Oh yeah, totally. But what it kind of reminds me of is Die Hard. Is when everybody starts getting there on Die Hard, you got the principal from from The Breakfast Club, and just it kind of gives everybody out there, kind of their own little shtick. You know what I mean? It's like Joey Pants has kind of got his own thing. The guy with the ponytail, he's got the ponytail. So they're giving everybody either like a characteristic look or just some type of personality that's just different enough so that you remember them. So it does feel like a seasoned crew. And, I think just even with the way Tommy Lee Jones, the way his character there presents himself, it comes off very realistic that, this guy is, the seasoned vet. You know what I mean? He's got no time for bullshit. He's just going to be the guy who's going to come in, he's going to speak his mind. You may not like what I'm saying, agree with me, whatever, you know what I mean? But I'm right. And you're going to fall in line with me. So yeah, it's a great character, especially the whole setup with him in the beginning when he's, giving them all the directions, and just how you can just tell the way everybody pays attention to him that it's like, okay, he demands some type of respect and there's a reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, he's proven right very quickly because the sheriff has just wrapped this whole thing up on the press conference. And he's like, well, how did he get out of these chains? And sheriff, oh my, maybe we do need to do some roadblocks. And he just takes over the whole bit and it starts giving all those orders and sending people around. And then the manhunt is on. And that's what's really cool about this is, again, we're in the first act of the movie and the manhunt's happening. And that all culminates with the bit that Kimball goes to that little clinic. And I love how precise he is with this. Luckily, he picks like the right size guy laying in the bed, starts stealing this poor old man's clothes, eats his breakfast, which is hospital breakfast. That was a good looking hospital breakfast, by the way. They're not like any hospital I've ever was in. But he walks out in front of the police because he shaved his face off, and they bring in the guard that he saved who was stabbed. And before the guy can identify him, he puts the oxygen mask back on his face. He says, oh, he's got a puncture in the abdomen. And they're like, how do you know that? And he just takes off with the ambulance. But I love how this movie is not dumb, where in some movies, like he would get away and then be gone, and it would be like 3 days later, oh, maybe that was Dr. Kimball. They figure that out inside of like 5 minutes, the way they would, because that guard rips that mask off when they get inside and go, that's Kimball. And then they get the words of Gerard. And I love the chase that ends in the sewer tunnel there, or the water tunnel, and he takes down through the sewers and gets to the spillway. And as a guy who grew up near a dam and know spillways a little bit, I always loved watching this scene because I could imagine, like, if somebody tried to do that off of Wilson Dam, how would it work? And for years, Nick, I banged this movie for like the most unbelievable, there's no way this guy taking a header off this would survive. But if you watch it, there's a specific way they shoot that stuntman doing it, where he lands in the spillway wash, and then that takes him underneath. Now, granted, there's still low chances of survival, but it wasn't like he took a Greg Louganis off of the thing.
Yeah, well, hasn't there been people that survived, like going over Niagara or something like that? Like some guy put himself like in a whiskey barrel and went over and survived. So, I mean, and then that's also a thing too. I mean, my God, how many movies have we seen, like, where people are going over waterfalls or even like through like whitewater rapids that would totally break your neck, and yet they survive. So, it's something where it's, again, it's another big action scene, and that's one thing. It's kind of cool. What I like about this movie though is like it's got these key moments that you remember. It's got the the train scene, and then it's got this water scene and everything, or this jump scene. And God, it's almost like, I'm not going to say like James Bond or something like that, but that's one thing you remember when you watch James Bond's, is you remember those big action scenes that are memorable because of the stunt work. And it's almost kind of doing that same type of philosophy with this movie, where it's got so much investigation and everything, which could get really, really boring, but they're smart enough to be able to add these scenes that are kind of, kind of smartly added to the movie that feel natural to the story, but then also make it somewhat exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and what happens in this movie, which is a real neat turn, is all the action movie part of this is really in this first act. And once he plunges off of that dam, and they have to go chasing, for him after that, then it becomes a detective story and a legal thriller for the second act before we get to the big third act climax. And really the next hour or so of the movie is a lot of cat and mouse stuff. And there's tons of it here. And that's a really neat way to transition the movie, because we thought, okay, we're gonna get this big action movie. He's jumping off of trains, or jumping off of buses, getting hit by trains, and he's jumping off of dams and all this stuff. But the movie is telegraphing and telling you that, no, this movie's about something more. And it's all set up in the way that Gerard and him have that interaction right before he takes the jump off of there. Is Gerard falls down, drops his gun, and Kimball gets it up. And you can tell he doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't know what to do with the gun. And Gerard's looking at him like, you need to put that down. And he gives him the whole, I didn't kill my wife. I don't care. Because guess what? That's not his job. I'm just here to bring you back. That is what I do. I don't have any other agendas here. You tell that story to somebody else. And then he's able to get the drop on him before Kimball surprises him and jumps off. And I think there's some neat stuff Tommy Lee Jones does when he's talking about what happens. He's telling the rest of his team, and you can see it kind of in his face that in some way he kind of admires the ballsiness it took to take a header like that and try to survive.
Well, I also think what that does is it starts setting up doubt in that guy's character, because why wouldn't he just kill me? You know what I mean? Why wouldn't he? He had a chance to kill me. He could have killed me and got out of there a heck of a lot easier, but he rather have risked his own life to get away and not even harm me. You know what I mean? It's like he's already on death row. So who cares? He kills him. What are they going to do? Shock his dead body again? I mean, he could totally just kill the guy with no whatever. But I think what that does is it kind of sets his character up to being like, okay, even though I'm here to catch this guy, I'm starting to have some doubts here, because why didn't he just kill me and just walk over my dead body? Why did he risk his own life to get away without harming me? Why would he even tell me that? So,
yeah, it's like what Al Pacino says in Heat. Once it becomes a murder one beef rap for all of them, you kill everybody else, because what difference does it make at that point? This guy's already, you're right, convicted of murder. He's going to death row. So what's the difference? He's already got half the cops chasing him anyway. If he shoots an agent, who cares? But he doesn't. And I think you pointed out great that it does plant that little seed of doubt before Gerard goes back. And, their search comes up empty. And what I like next is that we get this great detail. And again, this is the kind of thing that a movie nowadays just wouldn't take the time to do. They totally go and work another case. Like, you can tell they've got multiple things going at once, and they get a hot tip on a guy they've been after. And so they drop the Kimball thing, and what do? They go and raid the house in the ghetto where they have the little shootout and stuff. And I know part of that is to show, like, how fearless Gerard is, and that I don't bargain and that whole bit. But I just think it's neat that we actually get to see them work a different case while we're watching Kimball do all this stuff at the hospital.
Yeah, no, totally. I think and plus they had to close the thread with that guy just to be able to show what really happened with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of detail is, again, though, it's unique. It's different to let people go on with their lives, because we don't really know, I don't think, how much time passes here, a couple of months maybe or something. I mean, it's not too terribly long, but there's times where they're having conversations and they're like, we don't know where he is. We don't know this. Kimball gets back to town. He calls his lawyer and asks him for money. And the lawyer's like, you turn yourself in. Of course, that it's recorded. It goes to the FBI. And what I love here is the U.S. Marshal Service has like the most sophisticated reel-to-reel technology. So that's kind of neat. I think they ripped that off in a Saw movie somewhere years later too. I don't know how realistic that is even for today, much less back then. But it's neat to watch them kind of work.
Yeah, it's like one of those things too. I mean, if you ever work with photography or, any type of like graphics program where you have like someone where it's like, ooh, bring that up. And now, you know what I mean? Like a picture, and it's like, okay, you know what I mean? Where they make it more clear? Okay, bring it in even more and then make it clearer. It's like pixels are pixels. You know what I mean? You can't really make them more clear, or, I forget what they call it in movies. So it's kind of like that. Again, it's one of those things where they're trying to get them from point A to point B to point C. And sometimes, you gotta add in a little bit of disbelief in there. But then again, too, I mean, like 90% of when they're watching this, like 90% of the audience isn't really going to know. You know what I mean? The whole thing is going to be the whole additive, like, we put a man on the moon. Of course we can do that. You know what I mean? Why can't we isolate sound? So it's just one of those things where to get them from point A to point B to point C, I go with it.
I think it also is supposed to show that these guys are not just bumbling idiots. They are the best. They're really good at what they do. And it's not just one guy. It's not just Gerard. It's his whole team. And then there's other people that you don't even know their names, but they're over there doing stuff and they're talking and they're working through, and you're watching him logically deduce and figure all this stuff out. That's the neat part. And it's juxtaposed to watching Kimball operate his way into the hospital, because what a neat idea. He goes not only back to town where he's from, but he goes back to the clinics that he's worked in, because he knows how to infiltrate him. He steals the janitor's badge and makes a fake of it so he can get in and out, even though everybody knows Jose, and that's not Jose. He's a foot taller, but whatever. And he can because nobody notices the janitor, right? They just go in, come and go, and do whatever they want. And you watch him working through the whole computers and trying to find a one-armed man and trying to find one that meets the description I'm looking for and all of that. You're watching two experts work, and one of them is a solo expert and one of them is a group of experts, but it's the act two of experts is what we get.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, that's one thing I like, is kind of like you're saying, kind of the back and forth between it. It's well done, because you're kind of seeing them both do their own little investigations here. And one thing I do like, though, is like every time Richard goes and does something, he's also leaving them clues of why he was there, or that he was there. It wasn't all done in secret. He's basically trying to figure this out and trying to basically tell the U.S. Marshals why he's trying to figure this out at the same time, because he knows that, you know what, he figures this out and he goes and catches whoever's doing it, it doesn't mean anything unless the authorities know.
Exactly. And he already knows the cops are never going to believe him, but he's made this connection with Gerard. He's like, well, I spared him and he's got to know I could have killed him, but I didn't for a reason. So if I keep leaving him breadcrumbs, this guy's going to figure it out. And I mean, he ultimately calls him. We'll talk about that when we get there. But I do think it's neat how Kimball does this. But on the other hand, he also does some stupid stuff that he can't help himself, like when they have the bus crash with all the kids come in, right? There's a lot of bus crashes in this town, by the way. We got to get better bus safety. But
it's Chicago. It's Chicago. I mean, I'm not joking. I mean, so I drive through Chicago quite a bit, especially when I'm going home to up in Milwaukee. And that's one thing they have is they got their message boards above the freeway, and they give real life statistics of all the crashes, and it's crazy how many crashes. I think I was there in like January, and there was already 100 crashes on the interstate there.
Holy cow! They bring in all these kids, and there's the one kid on the gurney that like can't breathe and is, laboring or whatever. And the one doctor kind of half ignores the X-ray and doesn't really pay any attention, and they move on. And Julianne Moore, who only gets 2 scenes in this is kind of an early role for her. Oh, I like her, but we'll come back to that another time. But I like her, and I like her in this kind of thing where she's a good supporting role. And I buy her as the bossy kind of young doctor down there, the ER doc. And she's like, hey, you need to move this kid for me, whatever. And then she sees him like looking at the X-rays and do this. And then I love how he changes the orders. And then when it comes for the doctor's signature, it's just I'm just going to scribble. Nobody's going to care. And they don't. He takes him right up to surgery. And I was like, that's a good doctor joke. I appreciated that.
Oh yeah, you ever see a prescription? I mean, that's one thing. My wife works in pharmaceuticals, and I always joke with her all the time. I'm like, how the hell can you even read any of that writing? And she tells me there's actually been classes for like pharmacists to be able to read writing like that, because some of it is so illegible, because doctors, I mean, they're moving fast and they got to go somewhere, and they just scribble stuff down, and it's like they just got to be able to read bad handwriting. But it is a joke. I mean, God, I remember even as a kid getting like prescriptions or something and kind of laughing at it with my mom as he take the little essentially the white Post-it note that the doctors have to the pharmacy, and just being like, I'm kind of worried here. What if they give me the wrong medicine? Because I have no idea what this reads, but sure enough, they know how to. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, though. I mean, throughout this whole movie is they're trying to keep you on his side. I mean, even though you're on his side no matter what, they're trying to show you it's like, this guy is a good guy. You know what I mean? Even when he's fighting for his life and, trying to figure out who the one-armed man is and all this stuff, that it's like he still has time for like, a kid with a broken sternum or whatever was wrong with him to be able to help save his life. So it's like, it makes it even more on his side throughout the whole movie. And he does it throughout. I mean, he's always like, he's got to do that one good deed every place he goes to just to be able to show what a good guy he is.
Yeah, Jack, I'm surprised he didn't call in the tip on the drug dealing Russian son or whatever it was at the flop house he's staying in. That kind of gives us a little scare early on. The thing I appreciate about this, though, is that, like we've talked about with the experts that work with Gerard, and even Julianne Moore, which this is kind of a nothing character. It really, she gets 2 scenes, but she's not an idiot. Like, she realizes, wait a second. What happened to that kid? He's not in my, there's not in the charge records. And she finds out he went to surgery. Who changed his orders? How did that happen? And then she finally runs him down. And it's like, you like reading X-rays, do you? And she's just questioning him, and he's like, whatever, lady, I'm just going to move on. And Harrison Ford is just trying to be so wooden right here, which is very natural for him. And I love how Julianne Moore's like, no, stop. And she rips that badge off of him, and she starts going up, call security, and he just hightails it out of there. But I appreciate the fact that she's not an idiot and doesn't get duped along this. So by the time Gerard catches up to her, she's like, look, I did everything I could. What you want me to do? Tackle the guy? And I love her last line. It's like, well, you did save the kid's life, So I don't know. It's kind of neat to see how Kimball is able to get these people to help him. And that's the thing that happens on the show, and it happens throughout the movie too, is that he bumps into people from his life. Normally that's the thing you don't want to do when you're in hiding, is bump into people. I mean, he bumps into Nichols, and tries to hit him up for a little cash, and he gets some. And we don't find out till the end that Nichols is the bad guy. And I mean, maybe you can kind of see it coming because he's sort of stereotypical. But for a while, we're to think he's pretty honest, because when the agents ask him about it, he's like, okay, I saw him this morning. He hit me up for some cash on the street. And I gave him what I had, and he moved on. The ultimate bad guy figures out real quick, like, you know what? I don't have to lie to everybody. I can just tell a little bit of the truth, and it'll get me by. I appreciate how smart everybody in this movie is.
Yeah, it's kind of that age-old thing where it's like, as long as, you tell them a little bit of a truth or something like that, you're not lying, you know what I mean? You're just not telling them the whole truth, so
Yeah, well,
you're not
every
telling
lie
the whole
has a
truth
grain of
line.
truth to it, right? That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the one thing too, is the movie's almost, it's clever in its way, because they even bring it up during the movie, is like, why is a guy in hiding going to places where there's tons of cops, going to places where there's people that are going to possibly recognize him? And, they can just sit there and kind of work it into his whole motivation, is like, well, he needs to, one, to be able to find out who did this, but also it's just going to help lead to more questions about why he's doing this. Like, a guilty man, why would he be putting himself there at risk? Something you would normally question in a movie like that. It'd be like, why is the big breasted babysitter running upstairs? You know what I mean? Instead of running out the front door. It's like something like that, where it's like, it's so much plot driven, but it's also adds a lot more suspense to it at the same time.
Yeah, it does. And it also, again, allows you to know there are a lot of people that believe Richard Kimball and have believed him the whole time. Jane Lynch's character, which is coming an early role for somebody that now you see in a lot of stuff.
She is almost unrecognizable. I mean, she's recognizable, but I and I heard her voice, and I'm like, that looks just like her. That just sounds like her. But I watched the entire credits until her name came up, and I'm like, yep, I knew it. But it's like, even though it all made sense that it was her, I still was like, is that her?
It just doesn't look like her, but I mean, you're talking about 27, almost 30 years of work. It changed since, but she's still tall, got that same short blonde hair, got that same voice, and a little bit of that sarcasm. But in this one, she's playing the straight. She's a lab person, and she's worked with Kimball. She's a researcher, and that's part of the whole unraveling of this and this is what I think is amazing, is that Charles Nichols is so smart. He thinks he can outsmart this whole bit and get away with all this, but he makes one mistake. When Kimball calls him again, he says, I need you to talk to our, lab guy down in the basement there, the black guy that they call Bones or whatever, and let him get some samples or whatever. And Nichols has got to know, if he gets his hands on those, he's going to figure out what happens. But he mistakes, like, he'll never figure it out. And he doesn't count on Jane Lynch being like the big piece, going like, no, these are not the same, from the same place. They're all the same person. And they're a healthy liver. They're not the right liver for this drug test that they're doing. All that unravels in front of him because Nichols doesn't think Kimball's smart enough to figure it out, even though he says he's smarter earlier in the movie.
Yeah, I think it was just more or less is that, we're seeing throughout the movie of the steps that he's willing to take to try to figure this out. And I don't think it's necessarily that he doesn't think he's that smart or he is that smart. It's just that I don't think he's known about how the drastic tests or the steps that he's taken. So I think it's kind of just like, okay, whatever. And, then he ends up taking them there and kind of being able to put it all together with the lab samples. So it's just, it just, again, shows a perseverance of his character.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Nichols may also be biting on the fact that if Richard keeps hanging around hospitals, he's going to get arrested again. So this is not going to be a problem.
And even that, though, too, I think his whole thing is like, and so what? What's he going to prove here? That there was a increase in liver enzymes because of this medication? Okay. You know what I mean? It's like,
or that it didn't do anything. Like, that's the whole bit, is that this drug gets fast tracked because there's a little subversive, shot at the pharmaceutical industry here, and the hoary relationship they have with medicine and doctors is that, hey, we'll pay you a lot of money if you'll fast track these results for us so we can get this sucker on the market. And they have a name for the drug, Provasic, or what I think Harrison Ford throws that out there at that medical conference. And I love how that's kind of the underlying part of all of this, is that Nichols has got a lot of stock in this. So if it blows up, he's even richer, and more renowned and all that kind of stuff, which, that's one thing. Powerful people don't want less power. They tend to want more. And that's the rule here. And especially the, mustache twirling villain that Jerome Crabbe becomes at the end of this movie.
Yeah, and I'll say something controversial too, but I'll stand by it, is that, my family's very much has a lot of people in the medical fields. And that's always one thing that has always been consistent with pretty much everybody's opinion, is that a good number of doctors are egotistical, and they have to be. But I think that's the whole thing, is like, it comes off like this with this guy where it's like, of course he wants his name out there. You know what I mean? It's like he wants to be something even more than what he is, so it goes with the territory.
Yeah, versus a guy like Kimball, who he admits is smarter than him, but is also like I wouldn't call Kimball humble as much as I just call him so nerdy that he doesn't really know how to, blow his own horn. He's not putting himself over in front of anybody. He just kind of does what he does, and he's just all about his wife and all this stuff, and whatever. That's what it's about. I love how Kimball, when he finally figures out who the one-armed man is, Sykes. what a cool character and great character actor. Andreas Katsoulis is just one of those guys that plays a heavy in a lot of movies that you've seen, and he is perfect in this role. And I love how Kimball goes to his apartment, breaks in, starts laying stuff out, and then calls Gerard from the apartment and tells him, "Oh, I'm leaving you a big clue." And he leaves the phone off the hook. So they make sure the trace goes through. He can get him. And I love how Gerard plays it off when the guy comes back. He's like, why would this guy break into your apartment? You know, da, da, da. And when he walks out of there, the first thing he says to Joey Pants is like, man, this guy is dirty. This guy is so dirty. And you know it just by looking at him.
Oh, yeah. He's got that look on his face. God, even speaking of like, James Bond, I don't know if you ever, Casino Royale, the first bad guy that he played, that he won the Austin Martin off of. It's like, he's got the same look. He's got that. You don't ever trust a guy with, you don't ever trust a guy with dark eyes like that and curly hair. You just don't. It's just, they're always evil in movies. So, but that's one thing though, is like, I'm watching this stuff here and I'm just like, this guy's got one arm. Okay. I'm not going to sit there and say like people that are missing limbs or whatever, or like anything less or anything like that. But it's just like, why is this guy always like physically like owning Harrison Ford? He's only got one arm. I'm just thinking, I'm like, I'm always just kind of laughing at that. I'm like, it's almost like child's play when you like watch like, the guy and he's overtaking adults. It's like, come on here. I mean, I'm not, like I said, he's got to have a little bit of advantage here, but you're always being taken up by this guy. So that's the one thing I kind of laugh at here.
There's two things I could give you. One, he's a pretty big dude. So it's not like, he's small. Now Harrison Ford's a tall guy, but he's not like a muscular guy. That's not what you think of Harrison Ford for. He's not ripped, to whip anybody. Plus he's a big nerdy doctor. Plus this guy's an ex-cop who lost that arm in the line of duty somehow. So you talk about just somebody who's tough and mean, and look what he does for a living. He sets up, quote, security for the pharmaceutical firm. I'm like, he probably moonlights for the firm in Memphis that, Wilford Brimley worked for with Tom Cruise too. But he's just he's just a bad dude. Like I never once questioned that this guy with one arm was not even twice as more dangerous with that prosthetic arm than he would be with two arms, because he beats the crap out of everybody in this movie. It's not until he turns his back on Ford in the subway for a second that Ford's able to get the drop on him and wisely picks up the poor dead subway cop's cuffs and cuffs him with his good arm to the rail and leaves him sitting there. I mean, what a great idea.
I guess in a lesser movie, he probably would have like removed his hand and there was like a big blade in there or something. You know what I mean? Or
you're thinking about Puppet Master now. You've equated this guy to that.
Or, even like, probably a lesser movie would have Richard Kimball like ripping the arm off and then using it as a club and like knocking him out with it or something. You know what I mean? But they didn't go that way, which was, I guess, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to say disappointing, but it's,
Well, it's a good fight though, but it's a good inciting incident that gets us into the climax of the movie, because Gerard's right. He's like, man, a cop is dead from Chicago. Every Chicago cop is going to be shooting this guy the second they see him. There ain't going to be no bringing him in. Nobody's going to listen to him. He's going down. And this is when you realize on rewatch that Gerard believes him already. He already does, and he's got to get to him before the Chicago PD does, because he knows what they will do to him if they get there first. Because, look, and rightfully so, police departments get really pissed off when one of their people gets killed. Like, they really, really do. And that's the worst thing you want to do, is be in their way when they are on the hunt for the alleged perpetrators. I mean, a lot of bad things can happen if you get in the way of that steamroller when it's coming at you. And Gerard knows that.
One thing that I wanted to bring up to kind of go back in earlier in the movie, which I guess maybe in like the 2020 sensibility of, 24/7 news and everything that goes on in the world, was when Richard Kimball was running away and they're chasing after him. And then remember, his foot gets caught in the glass or in the sliding door. And Tommy Lee Jones goes for the kill shot multiple times on him. And I was kind of like, whoa, he's an unarmed guy and he's running away and you're going for the shot as he lays there. And that was just one of those things where I'm like, oh boy, if that, especially, today's climate, it's like, well, that might not sit well, especially in a public area.
He's running through the hospital and he gets behind the bulletproof glass. And it's just amazing that he got behind that, because ERs have those for specific reasons. You think Gerard would know that too, by the way, but he fires on him. And multiple times, like you say, it doesn't get him. So yeah, that's before he, I think, completely starts believing this guy. And right after that, it's when he gets convinced of it. But we get our final showdown here, though. And I got to say, I do like Harrison Ford's little grandstand at the medical conference, because it's always good to embarrass somebody in front of their peers, because that's a good way to get your way. And then they have like this knockdown, drag out old man fight up on that ceiling. And I love how when they fall into the little glass thing, they don't immediately action movie style go straight through it. The glass has to break, and then they fall through it. And it was just a little hint of realism there that the director added in that I appreciated.
Oh yeah, totally. And then, they got to find a way to eliminate like Joey Pants. Guess for whatever reason they got some extrusion or some beams hanging from
I can actually explain this.
I
can actually explain why that is there. That is there to carry those heavy pieces of laundry and give it weight, so you can slide that across the floor and it stay on track instead of running all over the place. So you hook it up on both ends of that I-beam and you slide it, and the I-beam's sliders and weight carry the weight of that cart down the track. That's what that's for. That's actually a real thing. I've seen that in facilities.
Okay, so basically it's just like it's a suspended conveyor belt. Basically.
Exactly. That is all that is. But how is Joey Pants walking around at the end of this? Well, he's not. I guess he gets gurneyed out. But how is he alive? That would have killed him, man. Because Nichols slings that I-beam at him at 20 miles an hour. Yeah,
there's no way the human skull can take that. I mean, that would have really been, if he'd at least be in a coma with brain bleeding by the time they got him.
He's not talking and dropping quips on the way to the hospital about taking vacation like that.
Yeah, no. Your orbital bone is completely shattered, and possibly your eyeball is floating around in your sinus cavity during that time. So yeah, but again, they got to be able to, if we can go with that, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's a small little thing at the end. But.
It's obviously too his mouth is not moving when they pull him on that gurney. That's an overdub line, because I'm sure in test screenings they're like, did Cosmo die? Everybody likes Cosmo. He can't. Pants can't die. And I'm sure they're like, you got to come loop a line, Joe, because people think you're dead.
Well, totally, because I noticed that too, because he's getting out and then he says something. I'm like, his mouth totally didn't move at all, so totally overdubbed. But yeah, you got to give the little thing about is he alive, is he dead, or something like that. So yeah, funny little joke makes him alive. So, but again, though, we're gonna get the almost kind of the reverse thing of the water fall scene at the end right here, where Tommy Lee Jones again has the gun pointed at him. And Richard Kimball then, comes in and ends up knocking with the pipe and not killing him, but knocking the guy out and saving his life. And kind of, 2 times now he could have let him die or been killed, and he saved his life. So it's kind of a, I don't know, I wouldn't say poetic, but just kind of a nice little, circle around to what's been going on with the movie, especially with Richard Kimball just being an all-around good guy. So.
Yeah, and I mean, we have that great end to where I love Jones's lines here. He's looking at him going like, I need a nap. I'm glad this is over. Aren't you? And all I found that to be really humorous and well placed in a movie that there'd been a ton of tension. Let's kind of cut that tension with just a little bit of sarcasm here at the end. And then we do get a little coda end here where, like you say, the news have descended on all of this and the cops are still like, hey, we're still convicted last we heard, yada, yada. And they're leading Kimball out in handcuffs. But the minute Gerard gets him in that car, he uncuffs him, throws the cuffs away, and they had that great last line. I was like, I thought you didn't care. Oh, I don't. And then they laugh and just stride off into the night. And I'm like, man, that's going to be a heck of a report that Gerard has to file. And it's going to take a few months to undo everything Richard Kimball just did and what's been done to him. But
regardless of all that happening, he's still going to jail until they get it figured out. You know what I mean?
He's going to a holding cell. Like, I think the marshals are like, we'll hold him down here at our office and he can just kind of hang out. We'll sort this stuff out. And then, oh no, he's definitely, he's not going to let him go back to the Chicago PD because he knows what's going on down there. But
and then of course there's going to be other stuff too. I mean, if you want to get like real world here, it's like, okay, you were there at a hospital, you don't have a doctor's license anymore, you were altering doctor's records. I mean, there's things that they could probably get him for if they want to be jerks. So hopefully they wouldn't do that. But, it's one of those things where, it's a feel good moment at the end, but it's like, there's about 6 months more worth of paperwork and stuff to go through. He's not going home that night. He's got a few more, at least another week in the holding cell until they get this whole thing taken care of, because even if they would, I mean, they got to sit there and try the other guys and get everything. And that's the whole thing, is that, based upon probably the way it is that the one-armed man probably is going to quickly turn on Nichols once he gets in there to try to save his butt as much as he can. You know what I mean?
Oh, completely. Yeah. That guy's going to flip. Yeah. Especially being a former cop, they're going to be like, look, we make this real easy for you, Sykes. You flip, you do a nickel, yada, yada. And because they're not going to, I mean, Kimball's like, hey, I'll testify. And the cops are like, no, you just stay over there. Also, the humdinger of the lawsuit that Richard Kimball now has against the Chicago Police Department. Yeah. He's going to be a doctor, but wow, he's going to get a little settlement out of that.
Yep, and Nichols will probably get the death penalty and everything like that since Richard Kimball had it. So, but again, though, stuff that we don't need to see. And like I said, it ends on a feel good note and everything. And I'm glad it ended there. You know what I mean? The movie's, it's a long movie. It's over 2 hours. Mm-hmm. So, and it's just at that point, I mean, you got kind of the cliched 90, going to fight on top of the building. Kind of reminded me of Darkman a little bit. And, but it's like I said, it's a good ending, and I like it that they end on the joke and everything like that as well.
Yeah, it's a good light moment, and like we say, we're sitting there talking about all the real world stuff that happens thereafter. But Richard Kimball, once this story gets leaked, and Gerard's people will probably leak it to help him. Once this gets leaked in the press, he's going to be a hero. He's going to be doing Dateline. He's going to be in all kinds of stuff.
And what's going to happen to that pharmaceutical company?
Yeah. We didn't even talk about that. Like, Nichols not only kills Kimball's wife, which I got a question about that in a sec, but he kills the head of the pharmaceutical company, who's also figured out that these results are bogus. This guy is like a mafia hitman. He's a don.
Oh yeah, he totally fit in during the meeting of the 5 families and good, and The Godfather. It's like, we gotta, we're just gonna let the poor people take this drug anyways. They have no souls. So
that's pretty much what he's saying at this point, right? And yeah, you got that whole bit. But I gotta ask you this: so Nichols has the head of the pharmaceutical place killed, and we meet that guy at the party, and there's a couple of flashbacks with him, but he has Kimball's wife killed instead of having Kimball killed in like a random mugging. Wouldn't that be more believable? Why kill his wife and set him up? That seems wicked elaborate just to try to get him out of the way.
I think he was still intending to kill him. I think he was just going to kill them both. And I think it was just Richard wasn't home on time.
Oh, good point.
I think it was just he killed her, and it just kind of was – it happened the way it happened. I think it just kind of happened perfectly with her, like, kind of on her, as her brain's expiring, kind of hearing Richard come in that, she's trying to warn him, and how it comes off almost as a confession or whatever for him. So it's just, I think it was more of they wanted to kill him and probably have him killed, have that guy kill them both, look like a botched, robbery or something like that. But it just ended up turning out that way. And I think in the end too, they're probably like, hey, this works even better because now this guy's a known killer and everything like this. So no one's going to believe a word he says.
Right. He does show up, you're right, before Sykes can get out of there or finish him off. And, we talked about how Sykes beats the crap out of him, but Kimball gets the best of him enough to knock him down the stairs. And that's how he gets away. And then, everything goes down from there. But you're right. It worked out well, but you're probably right. They were going to kill them both there at that point. But
because, you kill her first, and then the guy walks in and sees his wife dead right there. And as his back is turned, you strike him down. It's probably something like that.
It didn't need to work out that way because everything, if that had gone that way, we wouldn't have had this cool movie. So, Nick, we're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So, what are yours for The Fugitive?
It's a solid, large popcorn. I think it's a really fun movie. I think it's kind of a cool little callback to the 90s. It's very 90s with a lot of stuff, like you're saying, like with the technology and lack of DNA and all that fun stuff. But I think it's a really solid thriller. And kind of like we said, with like Ford versus Ferrari and everything like that, where it's just like, man, I kind of wish we'd get more movies like this. I do appreciate the fact that, stuff like 24 and everything like that, The Shield, Justified comes out, and these things that could have easily been, early 90s movies are being more spread apart over 4 or 5 seasons of TV. But it would be nice to kind of start getting more, adult thrillers, dramas like this back in the theater. But, to this movie, though, yeah, like I said, it's a solid large popcorn, really, really fun movie, and probably one I'll revisit again, probably sooner than later.
Yeah, I'm going to join you. It's definitely large popcorn. There's parts of it that don't entirely hold up because the tech now in it is so dated, and we've come so far in almost 3 decades now of phone technology and stuff. And if you put this in the cell phone era, it would be a completely different movie. But it works for what it is. And like we've talked about, it's neat to see adult drama thrillers with actors that can carry it. And I don't mean just our 2 leads, Ford and Jones here. I mean everybody. Everybody in this is so well cast. They play their role, even down to the smallest things. Jane Lynch and Julianne Moore and their small roles are great in them. And they deliver performances that allow you to forget you're watching actors and you're actually watching these characters come to life. And a lot of that, I'm going to say, goes to the director. I think Andrew Davis did a bang-up job directing this thing. And I mean, it was a hard task to try to follow that. That was a super popular show, and they made a movie that has stood the test of time and will continue to do so. So I agree with you. Large popcorn all the way and a ton of fun. And glad we got a chance to revisit it here on Filmstrip.
Totally.
All right, folks, you can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com, as well as the feeds to everywhere you can subscribe and download the show. Google, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, you name it, we're there. You can also follow the show's social media at FilmstripPod on Twitter and Instagram, and Filmstrip Podcast on Facebook. We appreciate your support very much. And until next time, for Nick, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.